So keep in mind, this is Brad's idea.
So we can blame Brad.
Yes.
Yeah,
If it doesn't work, blame me.
So Brad, can you introduce yourself to everyone? I mean, and before you do, I'll just tee it up a little bit. Brad and I have known each other for, I don't know, going on 15 years, give or take. And he's been inspiring to me. He's now a personal friend as well as someone that I collaborate with. So I appreciate you being here. And Vanessa, we've met more recently, but in just getting to know you over the past however many months, it's been very apparent that you are not only accomplished, but you have brought a level of fortitude and creativity to this work, which is required. Because I often say we're in a crisis of courage and clarity and creativity in our discipline, and I've seen you exhibit all those. So, Brad, if you would, just introduce yourself a little bit, and Vanessa, if you do the same, that'd be great.
So, hey everyone, I'm the head of HR Analytics at Bristol-Myers Squibb, which I know is a little bit of an odd title. So usually I'll just say I'm the head of people, global head of people analytics. I think HR, we tend to orient more times around function. So we do more than just HR, which I'm sure we'll get into a little bit like in this conversation. I have a small team there, and we focus more on the talent side. And I think it's important context is we are actually not part of HR. How many other people sit outside the HR function in their analytics capability? Anyone? A few hands. All right, so I think that's a differentiator, which I think I'd like to get into more in this session. But we're part of a centralized business insights analytics team. It's about 300 people that support or provides analytics across the entire enterprise.
Vanessa?
Sure. Hi, my name is Vanessa Lammers. My background is in industrial organizational psychology. I, as Al mentioned, was previously leading people analytics for Nestle Waters, which is a globally managed business within the very large Nestle family. About 4 months ago, I joined Estee Lauder. Much more exciting category for me. So we are very much on the beginning of our analytics journey. And we do sit within HR, although our business intelligence and analytics function is growing, and we kind of dotted line into there as well. So yeah, it's a little bit about me.
Good.
So Brad, let's just take off your point that you just brought up. Should people analytics, in your perspective, sit within HR? And again, let me provide some anecdotes on this. So should a doctor be diagnosing him or herself? I think we'll all agree that's probably not a good idea. And we have HR effectively trying to discover what's happening within the organization relative to their initiatives. So and I've experienced this, where there's a level of defensiveness or downright suppression of insight because it doesn't make a certain leader look good. So I know that's a drastic example, but Brad, whether it be that example or your experience and ideas, where do you think it's a healthy place for people analytics to sit? And I know it depends.
Yeah. So I don't think it's perfect either place. First of all, so I think it kind of depends. The reason why, which is what I said, what you said not to say. But when I look at Bristol-Myers Squibb and what we're trying to accomplish there by centralizing the analytics function, and then and also having deep partnership with IT, we actually both report into global business operations. We're almost like viewed as building a capability for the enterprise. So we have data lake strategies, we have strategies around our own analytics platforms. We sit on the same floor as some of our partners that are doing R&D analytics, or a floor below people doing commercial analytics. So when you look at solving business problems, which I know has come up multiple times in this session, we're sitting next to the people helping solve the business problems. And so it's more easy for us to connect with the other people doing data science or analytics across the enterprise. And I think the hardest thing is making sure you also maintain the relationship. So what I found is, like when I was building in the first year or two, I spent a disproportionate amount of time with my team building capability. But now I spend almost all my time sitting with my partners and understanding what we need to solve. And so I think if you aren't in HR, you have to disproportionately spend time on managing and maintaining the relationship. If you sit in HR, you're probably spending just more time with your IT partners and the people trying to influence, build, and design. And so I think it's a matter of you have to manage the seam regardless,
Yep.
and try. And I think it's up to the enterprise to have a strategy. So it makes sense for us to be in BIA if we've said we're going to support all analytics centrally across the enterprise out of a hub. Because then if you weren't, then you're leaving behind the people side of the equation, which wouldn't work.
And for everyone's benefit, BIA.
Business Insights Analytics.
And Vanessa, your thoughts on where people analytics function sits relative to your experience and ideas?
Yeah, I think so. The challenge that I have faced in like making this career move is that I went from reporting into the CHRO to reporting into the global head of talent who reports into the CHRO. So that has its challenges in that even like the naming of my function, which talent insights, and we've had large conversations about this with my team. For me, it's really about the workforce, both internal and external, right? And the problem, I think, even though I'm sitting in HR, I'm reporting into essentially what is talent acquisition. The things that, my boss is really wanting me to focus on can be very, very talent acquisition heavy. So it kind of goes back to what you're saying about, addressing our own needs internally. So I think that can be a challenge too, even if you are sitting within HR, what that reporting structure looks like, just to make sure that you are looking at, the full range of things that you should be looking at in an analytics function. But then, to your point, I do spend a lot of time liaisoning and building relations with those in the BIA function and IT and data management. So there is a lot of time spent building relationships. And if I could give one piece of advice to all of you, it would be to not spare any time in that domain.
As a show of hands, of those of you who are in a people analytics function internally right now, who is within HR? Who's outside of HR? I'll ask that again. Just a handful. Okay, because I think that's the norm for the most part. Just to segue just a little bit, but it is related to where we sit, is this notion of prioritization. So you hear a lot of, okay, start with a business problem. If you have a bunch of internal customers, they have their own business problems. And not all internal customers are weighted equally. So there's a lot of stuff that we could do, particularly given the array of technologies, the array of data sets. So Brad, to you, how do you prioritize?
We've toyed around with this. Right now we do it through relationships. We actually toyed around with being more formal. All right, submit a request. We're going to prioritize the request. We're going to tell you where in the queue. We got some pretty strong feedback that made it feel a lot more like I'm just going to kind of sit in a case log like an IT function, and we really value like your agility and kind of working through with us what the priorities should be. So the way we work it is we have a set of priorities which we're communicating, and if a new one comes in, we proactively communicate the impact on other things. And what we found is it's a pretty straightforward conversation. It's pretty noticeable if that new thing is more important than others. And what we do is if a new thing comes in, we say, here are the other three things. I put it at the back of those, whatever we're working on, and this is when we'll get to it. Or if something bumps up, I've gone to other leaders and say, hey, I'm going to delay this project because I'm going to work on this other piece. It's been fast. Like, we really haven't needed that more formal request in order to work through it. Now, do I think there's going to come a time where it's going to be more difficult, or have there been times? Yes. And I found myself sitting in front of my CHRO and say, hey, based on this other thing, like we're gonna delay this piece of work for you because we're gonna work on something else for one of your peers. And she's like, I don't like it, but I understand the decision.
So does that ultimately what it comes down to is you and the CHRO just looking at all the projects? And
that's only happened once where I've had to go to her. Usually I work through her leadership team.
Okay.
They get together regularly. So if they have a beef with how we're prioritizing, they're going to talk amongst themselves. And so I've been able to manage it through those relationships.
So if I just play that back, there's visibility among the HR leadership team, what you're doing and also what you're not doing.
Yep. Yes.
To an extent.
I think there's always opportunities to bring more visibility. I mean, they're all very busy people managing their own pipelines. So it's more like when they need the visibility, they have it. And I've come in and talked about it. Outside of that, like we go into the way we operate is HR goes into the year with a book of work. Yeah. What we do is we look at the business strategy and the HR book of work and line our work up against that. So it's not really like a separate conversation because we're working on what's most important to HR and the business already.
Yeah.
And so it's really only when the things we didn't know about come in that the conversation's required.
So show of hands again, who has a similar process where the HR leadership team is aware of the projects the people analytics team is doing? Okay, that's good. And so, yeah, I remember going back, 15 plus years when I was in a role, it was like, okay, Al's going to come in and talk about analytics, but it was the thing that got bumped off the agenda. It was like, oh, yeah, we're not there yet. We'll talk about it later. But that's, not happening. You're an integral part of the leadership team. So with you, Vanessa, I mean, how do you prioritize?
Yeah, so I'm a bit lucky in that I have been able to spend the last 4 months literally understanding our HR strategy, talking to anyone and everyone about what our business priorities are, building those relationships and understanding what the priorities of the business are. And actually on Monday, we'll be sitting down and having a conversation with our CHRO around what I see as the current state and what I view as those priorities. Some of those, honestly, are a lot less glamorous. So for us, Estee Lauder grew exponentially, really in a very short period of time without any global data governance model. And because of that, all of our, different countries and regions have their own data governance and data dictionaries, and this is super not exciting to talk about, but in order for me to do effective analytics, those things kind of need to be in place. So there's a lot within that, like data governance and reporting and dashboarding, like setting up the basics, if you will, that are a priority for me, because unless that's done, then I can't do more exciting advanced analytics stuff. So educating our CHRO on that is going to be super critical and important, because I don't think that he necessarily understands today why we would dedicate time to those things. So fortunately, I've had a few months where this function is new. I wasn't coming in and replacing someone. So fortunately, since people don't know me yet, I haven't been bombarded with requests and had to deal with how do I prioritize these yet, which is super challenging. But I think in general, how I have dealt with it in the past and how I will continue to deal with it is really approaching projects that are going to have the largest impact, and thinking about it from the way that the organization is set up. So for us, our point of sale employees, for example, so the people sitting in, our Macy's or Bloomingdale's and selling our products, while they may not be an Estee Lauder employee, in some cases they are, in some cases they're not, that is the bulk of our workforce. So identifying ways that we can, optimize the talent acquisition process for those people, the development process, et cetera. So kind of identifying what I typically start with, where are my key workforce segments and what can I do to make things better for those. That makes sense.
It's super well said. And as you're talking, I'm reflecting on the fact that we have over the past 2 days talked about this imminent disruption. In fact, this disruption that's happening ongoing. So given that you're fresh in Estee Lauder, do you believe, or have you done so already, connected with any group that's doing strategy planning from an operational perspective and looking at these disruptions? And let me just frame the question a little bit more. I mentioned at the kickoff yesterday morning, we have McKinsey and Josh Bersin and Willis Towers Watson, Mercer, all these organizations talking about the need for new management models. Yet we're still very siloed, and I imagine Estee Lauder is going to be disrupted by automation and globalization, and it's going to happen ongoing. So are you engaging those folks, or is it more about the basics right now in terms of reporting and the basic analytics?
So, it really is the full gamut, to be completely honest. I'm also working on a project right now where we're setting up a new factory in a country that we haven't had a manufacturing presence before. And the irony for some of these things is that I'm being tasked with identifying what our talent strategy and workforce plan is going to be but we haven't yet decided on location and the technology that's going to be in that factory, right? So I come at it from like, let's first look externally at like what, we just got Talent Neuron, which is super exciting. So can we identify, from a location standpoint, like what is ideal? Where should we be putting this factory? And then, identify, okay, what machinery is going to be sitting in there? Because my ability to advise you on what your talent strategy should look like is going to be based on those things. Sometimes we have a tendency to kind of put the cart before the horse, if you will. So the things that we are working on are really broad spectrum. Yes, there is a lot in that data governance reporting space because I don't think that has been optimized, but there's also a lot that we've been doing in terms of, strategic workforce planning and changing our workforce and looking at capability shifts, things like that.
Outstanding. I'm glad you're doing that, and great work there. And so, Brad, a similar question: how engaged are you with a similar group that's looking at not only workforce planning but the future of BMS, and particularly given the merger?
Yeah, so we're pretty active. So we partner with the workforce planning team. More recently, there's specific questions or trending they're thinking is important based on the information that they've collected through the strategic workforce planning process, which would identify like critical segments, business shifts and things like that. And so we're partnering in the delivery of some insights to help support the planning effort there. And then on the integration side, we've been partnering from the beginning with helping think through. I don't know, most people doing M&As, we typically set up a clean room, which means that I can't actually access the data of the other company, but we would provide input and fields to think about. How do you structure it? So we almost become consultants to the consultants. And then as part of that too, we've also helped think through some of the issues we need to think through around like site location or how the R&D almost like markets have transformed. So venture capital investment, talent shifts and things like that across 3 areas of the globe. And so like we kind of look at our role to support these business questions to the degree we can. Sometimes we don't necessarily have an internal capability, so we can go to external research. Because usually, the point that Brady made earlier, like if you haven't set up the data model, ask the question, you're not going to be able to solve a question that needs to be answered in a couple of weeks because it's going to take you months to build out the capability. And so then what we've been able to do is say, well, what can we do instead? So kind of our position is it's always better to bring some facts to the table and some insights to the table to make a better decision, even if you can't maximize the decision.
Love it. So as we go here, these are 2 individuals again that are obviously very accomplished and have some great ideas. So we only have, I'm going to make it up, 10 more minutes of questions between the balance of our time here and when David wraps up. So if you have any burning questions, please ask them now. I am going to seed this. And again, I didn't stage this properly yesterday morning. When I ask questions, when David asks questions, we're effectively serving as your voice to the extent that we can. We're trying to empathize, listen, ask questions that someone just starting out or is trying to take the next step, in building their people and capability in their organizations would ask. So if no one jumps in with a question, I'm going to ask this question. If you were sitting out there 10 years ago, or Vanessa, however long, what questions would you wish you had asked that you did not? In other words, what would you hope is asked now?
That's a tricky question.
You want me to put a couple more twists on that?
Sure.
All right. I am actually going to, because this is actually important, because if we are, and I'm echoing to the extent possible Einstein, he said, if I have 1 minute to solve a problem, and spend 55 seconds, understanding the problem, and 5 seconds solving it. And I do not know if our discipline is actually staying in curiosity long enough to understand where it's going and how to get there. And I say that compassionately. I see it, okay, there's solutions out there and find a place for it. Oh, there's a business problem, and I go to that. And, again, to overplay the metaphor, we're skating to where the ball is, not to where it's going. And for better or for worse, that ball or puck is moving faster and faster and faster. So, I'm just really, curious on everyone's behalf. as we prioritize, not only prioritize an organization, but prioritize our own, development. What can and should we be focusing on? I don't pretend to have the answer. I just know that there's some questions out there that we haven't had the fortitude to ask.
So I'd pivot that. I probably didn't ask enough questions. So it's not a single question. I think, some of you know this. I actually left an IT function doing business kind of SAP BI. So I left a function doing SAP BI reporting for the business, and I was like, I'll go learn this other HR domain. Like 4 months in, I was like, what did I do? Like this is totally different than what I expected. The problems are different. I'm working in an HR function that doesn't understand my technical capabilities, and all the things they're wanting to press on me that I need to do better are all like HR behavioral things, and I'm not an HR person by background. And so I was very much a fish out of water. It was very uncomfortable, and it was a very difficult experience. But what got me over that was getting out there and starting to educate myself more, going to conferences like this, following people on LinkedIn, like David Green. I told him this, like, if I follow you, you're telling me about what everyone else is doing, which he's like a major connector to everyone else. Like, find those connectors. You heard about it earlier. To me, it's very real. If you find the couple of people that connect you to all the people in this room, you'll learn a tremendous amount. And, I make investments. It's hard. Like, we're all really busy people. It's hard to be away from your office for 2 days to be here. It's very hard for me to do that, but it's a worthy investment because you'll learn things. I've learned so much, and I wasn't even here yesterday. I got here late last night. In less than 24 hours, I've already walked away with 2 or 3 things I know I can go back and make a difference with. So to me, it's continuing to be naturally curious and focus with a couple of things. Like, don't boil the ocean. Like, you'll be unsuccessful if you try to tackle everything. Pick the most important business problem, solve that one, then solve the next one. I know part of the session was how do you build credibility and sustain and create a culture. You do it by solving one problem at a time and building up that credibility with your stakeholders. Like, they don't know how to solve all these problems either. And if you're solving their problems and their business problems, then they're going to invite you back to the next one and the next one. And now you have a culture of making fact-based decisions, and you're at the table each time.
Yeah, fantastic. Vanessa, thoughts to come up?
Yeah, no, I think that is... I like your spin, and this was something that we were talking about yesterday, actually, is like, I had someone reach out to me recently who is in the application process for a director of analytics position, and he said, what were the things that you wished that you would have asked in the application process for your Estee Lauder role? And of course, I was like, I should have asked more about data governance and reporting because, not that I wouldn't have accepted the role, but I probably would have come in with a better understanding of where we were and what my life was going to look like, at least for the first, year. So yeah, I think it's healthy feedback to ask as many questions as you can, both while you're external, but also while you're internal. I mean, I think that's the best piece of advice that I could give anyone that's starting a new job, right, is to listen more than you talk and to really, really try to understand where people are coming from and what their needs are and where you kind of fit into, that journey towards answering problems and making the business a better place.
Yeah, I love what you're both saying. I also am, on behalf of everybody here, am curious, and we're not going to solve it right now, but just as an ongoing challenge and opportunity, is what questions to ask. So, I'm going back a number of years. I used to go around trying to solve problems I thought was important, and someone pulled me aside one day and it's like, why are you working so hard, and why are you working on this stuff? Just go ask, how can I help you? Like, that simple question will open doors. Everyone's dealing with something. Everyone's dealing with a problem. And so take about that if you're interview process. What are the top 3 problems you're looking to solve, and how do you think I can help you solve them, right? Because now you're going to get insight into the strategy or the problems that are top of mind or the most critical factors, and it will probably give you deeper insight into whether or not your experience and your skill sets are matched against the problems that need to be solved now. If they aren't, you can have that transparent conversation ahead of time and tell them what problems you can help them solve,
right? And so because what you don't want to do is set yourself for failure. If they're trying to solve these 3 problems and you don't have that background, you don't want them to find out on day 1 when you start that there's not a match there. But what they will always appreciate is that honest, upfront conversation, and talk about how you can help them solve those problems. Because it's not always you, right? It's the team, right? So
no, absolutely. Vanessa?
Yeah, no, I agree. I think, in the 4 months that I have been at Estee Lauder, I've spent a lot of time with our HRBPs, understanding, asking them about what are the priorities of the brand or the region or the function or the channel that you support? What are the challenges that you are facing? What are the, priorities for you over the next 1 to 3 years? What are the things that, and I think this is actually a good one, like what are the things that keep you up at night, literally? And I think you can get a lot from answers to that question.
And I would encourage you, like if you are finding yourself in an interview process, like try to meet more than one person in the process. Like try to get an understanding, because everyone's going to have a different perspective on what the top issues are. If you're meeting someone from talent acquisition, it's going to be a totally different set than if it's in total rewards, than if it's like an HR business partner. Like they're solving different problems.
Yeah.
HR being perceived as report writers as opposed to analysts that are bringing insight to the fore that can help them, solve problems and take better action. Brad, you want to take that first?
Sure. That's always going to be a problem as you initially engage, but it's what they're trying to solve at the time. And so what I always try to do is, okay, great, I can do that for you, but I can do more. So like, what problem are you really trying to solve, and how can we partner on the delivery of that? What I found is over time, that'll start to be pivot to, we're actually working on the content together. Or we're figuring out if the current capabilities aren't meeting the need, what do we need to do instead? And then we actually become a partner in the delivery back to the business. But it doesn't start there, right? You have to build the relationship and you have to build the trust. And so I always encourage myself, it's kind of weird how I talk to myself, but I try to always meet people where they're at, and I encourage my team to do the same. Because if you're able, I don't know if it's me or not, but if you're able to address that problem, if you're able to help them solve that problem, they're likely to come back again. And what you don't want to have happen is it continues at that same relationship where you're always the reporting person, right? So you still have to have the difficult conversation and kind of push through and help them understand your broader set of capabilities. But that's hard to do in the first conversation.
I would say that, especially if you guys are first starting out, it is time well spent to really define like what your vision and mission is, and even probably more importantly, what is your process? And having a process, like literally having a process that talks about, identification of business problem, identification of hypotheses, identification of data needs, like all of that, then I think helps people to understand like, okay, so this doesn't start with me emailing you a request and getting a report back. I think also educating people on like what reports are and what reporting is versus what analytics is really important. I think a lot of times we use those terms interchangeably, and they are very different. Like I need reports to do analytics, but I view analytics as like the identification of meaningful insights from those reports, from that data, et cetera. So kind of explaining to people what those two things are and the role that you play in all of that will really help.
I think it's a great point. One thing I'd add is you probably have a team that does do reporting.
Yeah.
So everything I've done is I'll take the request and I'll email the person that does that and says, I believe this is a reporting request and would love, do you agree and can you solve it? And what I've done is now I'm brokering a new relationship with the person that does do that. So then they maybe don't come back to me because they're going to want speed, right? They're not going to want to come to me to go to that person, right? If they know that's the right person, they'll go there next time.
That's a really good point. Yeah, having a good good working relationship with the reporting team so that you both have a shared understanding of like roles and responsibilities and what goes to them and what goes to you is super helpful too.
So I'm going to take the last question, and then we can do some more questions for David, because number one, we have to do it. He has to catch a plane. But we talk about the idea of stakeholder engagement. This is a pointed question. I'll just be very concise. When I was enrolled at Gap, and looking back at my time there and in advising others over the years is I don't believe I did or I've seen others do a great job at actually identifying the internal customers, who are the people that I'm going to be serving. Because you can have these great conversations, but am I having the conversations with the right people, the people who are truly going to turn into advocates and be kind of the champions that are going to help you propagate your influence throughout the organization. So Vanessa, you were very accomplished at Nestle Waters, now you're at Estee Lauder. How are you identifying who to talk to?
Yeah, so I mean, I identify my function or our COE as serving or consulting with our HRBPs. So that would be, one of our client groups, but also the other COEs. So talent acquisition, at Estee Lauder, employee experience. So like surveys actually doesn't sit within my remit, it sits outside. Which I had very mixed feelings about at first, but now it's quite nice because I can, provide strategic advice around those things, but my team doesn't have to do kind of the administrative aspect, so it's quite a blessing. So all of the different COEs within HR are kind of the client groups that I have prioritized and spend most time with.
Brad?
One of the ways that we do is we start with the work. So if we match up against the company priorities, the strategy that involves and do a book of work, and then what we do is we create our own book of work in the same format as one of the teams that we just happen to like their format. Then what we do is when we go around to some of their meetings right at around year end when we're aligning objectives, we share with them what we're going to do, and that also helps identify the right parties to interact with. So for me, it's interacting with all the HR leadership team. For my team, it's going to be identifying who are the key stakeholders that they're working on the projects. And the way I've aligned my team is loosely against some of the other COEs. And then in certain cases, my HR VPs have been developing a relationship with a single person on my team. So they kind of know who they're going to go to. It doesn't mean that person's going to do all the work. So a lot of the work that we do, we actually have to do as a team because it crosses skill domains in order to get the work delivered. But it's really helped bolster, by having them manage a relationship, it's helped bolster the function because people are more comfortable, like who do they go to and talk through a problem. So I would say two things is make sure your team is also, it's not just the leader, but your team is also creating relationships with the stakeholders in addition to yours.
Love it.
As a leader.
Since you have the floor, Brad, any closing comments or thoughts as we wrap up?
I was telling Al this. I was saying, I always walk away amazed at how much this function has changed, and even the topics that we're talking about. Like I went to PAFOW San Francisco. That was just in January, right? Like the topics that we're talking about today are different than the topics we were talking about then. And it's amazing how fast this space is moving. And ironically, there was I believe it was Gartner that said like 65% of HR functions are considering investments in employee experience. That was a huge topic in January. Today, or over the last 3 or 4 days, I've heard a lot about skills and career and competencies, which was it was like it was either the next one down or a couple down, which was 50% of companies who are considering investments there. So I guess I'd say like there's a lot of opportunity for us to kind of advance our skill sets. Both of those could be outside the domain of what you're working on today. You have to think about how to enable them. You have to think about how you bring that content back in and apply it to all the other analytics you're maybe already doing. And I'm just amazed by, I guess I'm already talking to people that are already way ahead of us on kind of some of these new concepts. And it was great to learn from them. And so those were a couple of the connections I made that are really valuable. So I'd say continue to make connections here and outside of here, and continue to invest in your own development.
Yeah, and I would say, along those same lines, continue to keep in touch with and reach out to the people that you meet at things like this and other peer meetings, etc. When you have a challenge that you're facing at work that, you would like someone else's opinion on, I think we all get excited to be asked for our opinions on things and really like leverage those connections that you make at events like this, down the road when there are things that you would like someone else's eyes on.
You two Thank you so much for sharing. That was super inspiring and helpful. And so if you would, give them a round of applause. Thank you.
And thank you, Vanessa, for joining me.
So fun.